Hi, Drew. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, I'm so
Uh,
happy to be here. Thanks for
yeah,
having me.
perfect. So, just a really quick intro about PairTree before we jump in. I'm Audrey, the manager of community engagement here at PairTree. We're a connection platform that increases and accelerates connections between expectant moms and adoptive families. And today we have the opportunity to speak to Dru Groves, director of a Center for Adoption Services, certified counselor. She has a master's in marriage and family counseling, and she's just an all around adoption all star. So, Dru, thank you so much for joining us.
Wow, thank you for such a nice introduction. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So, our focus today is on home studies, which Dru superstar home studies. So, our first question is the one that we most frequently get asked by our families, which is just why do home studies sometimes take so long? And just a little light on why sometimes they can be so time consuming.
Sure. It's a great question. And I receive that question when I get calls or inquiries.
Mhm.
And so a lot of it is just very subjective. It depends kind of what state you're working in, who you're doing your home study through. Is it through a licensed agency? Is it through an independent social worker? Um, and so I think if I was contacting various groups and interviewing, I would ask that. Home studies don't have to take a long time. On average, my home studies take about 4 to 6 weeks from start to finish. And
Wow.
I tell people that your ability to kind of gather documents, secure appointments, is going to dictate our timeline. Um, some people maybe have lived in multiple states over the course of the past 5 years, so maybe they have to get child abuse clearances.
Mhm.
States like California can take a little bit longer.
Right.
Some home study providers will require 10 hours of adoption education. That can take some time.
Yeah.
So really, it's how busy the agency is.
Mhm.
But because it's a time sensitive document, and you are submitting time sensitive supporting documents,
Right.
you really don't want it to go on for 6 months because you'll be redoing documents.
Yeah.
And so hopefully who you're working with will kind of work with you and be a little bit of a squeaky wheel, because our job is to kind of orchestrate all of the documents coming in, our meetings coming in, and being able to issue in a timely fashion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One question that came up with what you were saying, do you have any questions that it would be helpful for hopeful adoptive parents to ask an agency or a social worker that could kind of give them an idea what value they would get out of them for the home study process?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think it's always of course, helpful to ask about timeline, kind of their caseload.
Yeah,
I find it's helpful that if I'm working with somebody who is working with maybe an out of state agency or a platform like yours, where
right,
you don't know where child is going to be born, and if
right.
ICPC, which means two states are involved, if I have not worked with who they're working with, I will typically send out an email, make a phone call right up front to say, is there anything that I should be aware of as the home study provider to make sure that things go smoothly?
Gotcha.
So I find that helpful if clients say to me right up front, we're thinking of working with this group or this group. And so sometimes I'll just send out a quick email to see if there's anything specific to them,
Ah, yeah,
requirements, because you can have state requirements and then you can have private agency, different platforms that have their own requirements,
right.
because there's no kind of uniform federal adoption law.
Mhm.
And so most of us who are doing this work we want to get your report right the first time.
Right.
And hopefully people view this as kind of a collaboration.
Yeah,
um,
I love
yeah,
that. Yeah, that's
yeah.
great. Um, and so kind of along with that, you're based out of Washington State, correct?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
do you work with families all throughout the US or only in Washington?
So I am licensed. I have a licensed child placing agency, and I've
Hmm.
been licensed in Washington for 30 years. So I'm only licensed in Washington. So I only work with families in Washington State.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of people will ask that, can I work with a placing agency in, Idaho, and
Right.
can they do my home study?
Right.
Well, they can if they are licensed here,
Ah,
and or meet the criteria as an independent social worker to do that.
okay.
It's not unusual for me to work with families who are working with an out of state organization,
Mhm.
um, but they still have to be home studied approved in the state that they reside in. So I
Okay.
sometimes think there's confusion around that.
Yeah.
Well, my group is here. Can somebody in Milwaukee do my home study in Washington?
Right.
The answer is no, unless they are licensed to do so here.
I see. Yeah.
They've
That's
been court approved to do that.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. That's extremely helpful.
yeah, good.
How has the home study process evolved in your time working in home studies? Have you seen it change at all, really?
Yes,
Yeah.
I have. So I've been doing home studies for over 30 years.
Mhm.
And I would say that over time, I think like home study templates have
Yeah.
gotten better, adoption
Okay.
education has gotten better,
Mhm.
support within local communities has increased.
Yeah.
And so I think that also with technology, there's just more transparency. There
Yeah.
are so many, adoptive parent support groups that adoption professionals are not participating on. So I actually think it's fairly easy to kind of do your due diligence to
Mhm.
check out, home study providers, and I
Yeah.
certainly encourage that.
I love that.
Um, I think that things have become a little bit more transparent in terms of what are requirements for interstate compact
Mhm.
placement adoptions where two states are involved.
Yeah.
And so most of us that work with clients who are working with groups where their babe could be in any state,
Mhm.
we want to make certain that our home studies meet the
Right.
requirements for all states.
Right.
And so, in that way, I think that there is kind of more collaboration with groups
Mhm.
where, originally when I first started working in this field, it was not as easy to collaborate with adoption professionals,
Right.
to say, have you worked with this state or this group? And so I also think not only are adoptive parents gathering more support through advanced technology,
Mhm.
adoption professionals are too. And so we
Yeah.
can do case consultation with each other with, great ease, and
Yeah.
kind of support each other.
That's great.
So I think, and then the biggest change with home
Mhm.
studies that I have seen are more extensive background clearances,
Ah,
FBI, as
mhm.
well as child abuse clearances
Yeah.
from every state that people have resided in for the past 5 years.
Okay.
And so that, that has been shifts in the past 10 years. And a lot of that is international adoption home
Right.
studies have a little bit of a higher bar in
Mhm.
terms of requirements. And so I think as a best practice, we are also trying to include some of those advancements because they're in all triad members' best interest.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. How many times have you walked into a home for a home study and there's been cookies baking in the oven or fresh flowers on the counter? And along with that, do you see often that families going through the home study process over prepare, or is there anything that you see a lot that isn't necessary?
I mean, I think in my experience, I
Mhm.
don't necessarily feel like families have over prepared because I
Okay.
feel like hopefully I have talked to them a number of times.
Right.
Like, I don't have an expectation of this,
Mhm.
in terms of things have to be an exact way. I'd rather have a
Right.
sense of, how your family life is.
Yes.
Um, but I, of course, if I was on the receiving end of an adoption home study,
Uh-huh.
I would be prepared just like I would be if I had company coming over.
Exactly.
So part
Gotcha.
of it is just kind of, I think, polite,
Yeah.
etiquette. But I
Yeah.
think where there can be confusion is that
Mhm.
if people have been looking into either foster care or
Mhm.
FOST to adopt home
Yes.
studies,
Mhm.
the home inspection piece is very different than with a private domestic adoption home study.
Okay. Mhm.
And yet, agencies can also have their own private policy on what they expect.
All
So
right.
you always just want to have whoever your home study provider is going to be to
Mhm.
ask them what is their expectation.
Yeah.
Um, like one thing that I have in my agency as a policy is if people have firearms,
Mhm.
I want to see that they have a gun safe.
Yes.
And so that could be unique to my agency, but
Right.
not to others.
Okay.
So people should
Yeah.
just ask their home study providers, is there anything I should be aware of that
Right.
is unique to you or the
Yeah.
state?
Just communicate. I love that.
Communicate.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah. If you could change one thing about this process, what would it be?
Well, I would hope that adoptive families, I mean, this is a required
Hmm.
process that you have to go through.
Right.
And I have lots of people where they're doing initial inquiries who feel overwhelmed by the process,
Yeah.
feel like they're dreading it,
Hmm.
are concerned about, how deep we're going to kind of dig into backgrounds, etc.
Right.
And so, if you've done your due diligence and screening and you
Hmm.
feel very comfortable with your home study provider is, hopefully you look at that person as being part of your adoption team.
Yes.
That I really see myself as a collaboration with their whole team. I
Yeah.
am here to help and support them. There isn't a big mystery to the home study process.
Right.
I'm happy to answer questions. And if there's anything in their background that they are concerned about,
Hmm.
disclose, disclose, disclose,
Yeah.
right up front, because then
Yeah.
we can see what we need to do to problem solve.
Yeah.
If it is, like they say, a deal breaker for proceeding.
Right.
But that, in my experience, most home study providers that I have worked with over the years, want what's best for all triad members
Right.
and that they really are part of your team. So
Right.
if you're prepared and also have areas where you want additional education or focus, that, let them know.
Hmm.
And that, you can dig deeper into certain topics, whether, there's all kinds of things that people want to talk about in terms of
Right.
the adoption process, pre-placement, post-placement,
Yeah.
but that it really is a team effort and
Mhm.
that home studies surprisingly can be rather enjoyable.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they really can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like, yeah, our families need to hear that. And I love that message.
Yeah.
Yeah. And kind of coming off of that, I know one of the questions we see most frequently that people are most curious about is, do you often have to deny someone approval? And if so, is there like a common reason why?
Yeah, that's a great question. And certainly over the years that, I mean, I've been doing them for 30 years, home
Yeah.
studies. And so
Yeah.
that has come up.
Of course.
Not very often. And I think one of the
Yeah.
things when you work in private domestic adoptions,
Yeah.
there's, a little bit of a screening process in
Mhm.
that most people who are going to contact me, they're aware for the most part if there's anything in their background that would be, an issue. Um,
Mhm.
and so I think because of that natural kind of screening process that
Right.
happens, that
Mhm.
I don't see it a lot. And if I do, sometimes it's something that can be worked through.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe there has been, kind of marital stress, duress,
Right.
because infertility adoption can be extremely challenging.
Yes.
And so sometimes I will have couples who are not at the same place at the same time. And
Mhm.
so sometimes some additional education
Yeah.
helps with that.
Yeah.
Um, Medical diagnosis may be
Mhm.
something that um, somebody is very concerned about. Maybe we can get supplemental letters from their specialist. Maybe it
Right.
is an issue, but maybe it's not an issue.
Yeah.
Um, so it does happen, but I think that for most people who are going through the process,
Mhm.
they've kind of done a natural inventory on their own backgrounds
Yes.
and are aware. Well, maybe I had, for example, shoplifting or a
Right.
DUI when I was 18 years old. Is
Yes.
this going to stop me? So
Mhm.
those are things that, certainly can come up. That talk to your home study provider,
Yeah.
see if they have an actual, in-house policy.
Right.
Um, and typically lots of things can be worked out.
Yeah. I feel like that would give a lot of comfort to our families, and just that
Yeah,
same message that just communicate and ask questions, and
right.
yeah. I
Communication,
mhm.
transparency seems
Yeah.
to be, key with this
Yes,
process.
I
Yeah.
love that. And our final question is, and I communication might be part of this, but if you could just leave one piece of advice for families who are about to go through the process, or maybe are in the midst of a relatively long home study process, what would it be?
Yeah. Um, do your due diligence.
Yeah.
Interview home study providers,
Mhm.
and then also take kind of ownership for document gathering
Right.
and educational needs. And if there are certain concerns you have about the adoption home study process, talk about it up front so that you can actually kind of be grounded and
Yeah.
present during the interviews so that you can
Mhm.
really enjoy the
I love that.
process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. Yeah.
Good.
It was so great talking to you today. If any of our families want to find you or contact you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. Well, the name of my agency is a Center for Adoption Services. So you
Perfect.
can find me pretty
Mhm.
easily. And my email is easy. It's just my name, Drew at drugroves.org. And
Wonderful.
yeah, I'm easy to
Yeah,
find.
perfect.
Great.
This has been incredible. You are such a wealth of knowledge, and especially on home studies. And I feel like this will be such a comfort to a lot of our families who are maybe a bit scared of the home study
Yeah,
process.
absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
it's unknown, kind of
Mhm.
territory. So that is a really, appropriate feeling.
Yeah.
And as they gather information and feel empowered and a little bit more knowledgeable,
Mhm.
they will feel better.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Drew, for chatting with us.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Audrey.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.